Welcome to this third video in our Getting Started series. In this video, we're going to start to look at the tools that are available in VCarve Desktop, Pro, and Aspire. Now, if you hadn't gone ahead and watched the first two videos in this series, then you're going to want to go ahead and backtrack and look at those because we're going to build on those tools that we talked about in those previous videos. Now, if you're a Cut 2D user and you snuck onto this third video, that's perfectly fine because this might be something you're going to want to look at in the future when you decide to upgrade, or if you do decide to upgrade. Now in this video, what I want to do is I'm going to show you how to import in a file, create a really quick V-carvable sign, edit those vectors, and create something that's a little bit more maybe useful for a mass audience, something more like a backyard barbecue sign. So let's jump into the software and get started on this.
As you can see here, we have a brand new instance of VCarve Desktop loaded up. Now all the tools that we're going to look at in this video are also available in VCarve Pro and Aspire. So to get started, what we're going to do is create a brand new file. We're going to make sure this is a single-sided job. The width of the job is going to be 12 inches, the height will be 5, and the thickness is going to be 3/4 of an inch. And we'll verify that later when we get around to creating our toolpaths. Obviously, it's going to be inches of what we're going to be using for our units for this job. We're going to zero off our material surface. Our XY datum, or our start position, is going to be in the bottom left-hand corner. And because there isn't any 3D content in this job at all, we're going to go ahead and use a standard resolution. For our material setup, we're going to go ahead and use walnut, which is pretty close to the material that we have on hand to cut into in the end. That way we'll get a decent idea of how this should look once we're all done cutting it. Now we can just go ahead and click OK. Now to get started, we're going to go to our File Operations section of our Design tab and import in a vector that's already been created for us. And it's called the bull's head sign.dxf file. So we'll select that and we'll go ahead and click Open. Now that'll import in right into the center of our job, and we're now going to flip over to our 3D view where we can see those vectors as well. Now I think that we have a little bit more room on this piece of material to fit this sign. So let's go ahead and size this up. So to do that, I'm going to click on that again. Then I'm going to click on the bottom right-hand side control handle or scale handle. I'll click that. And you'll notice that the bottom field is now selected. And because I've chosen this bottom handle, the width and the height of this set of vectors will be scaled proportionately depending on what I type in here. And so in the end, I'm going to make this about 11 inches. And if I press enter, you'll see that it scales everything up for me. Now it's not quite centered in my job anymore. So let's just go ahead and use the alignment tool and put that back into the center of our material. And then I can close that down. Now that looks really good, but I think we're going to need to add a border to this because I like to V-carve in between these two lines, and I like to V-carve in between all of this text here as well. If you're a little bit unsure of how V-carving works, then I'd suggest you look at the related video called How to Use the VCarve Toolpath, where we explain all the ins and outs of VCarve tooling. So to do that, I have all that I need, but I would like to actually offset this vector here out a little bit so I have a nice border around my sign. So to do that, I'm going to have that vector selected. Go down to my Offset and Layout tools, and I'll just click Offset Vectors. I'm going to offset that outwards. I think 1/4 inch is probably pretty good. I don't really want to have nice sharp corners. I think nice smooth round corners will really add to the design a bit and draw out some of this flourish detail that we have here. So I'm going to go ahead and uncheck this Create Sharp Offset Corners. I'm going to select the created vector in the end, and we're going to offset that outwards. And then we can hit Escape on our keyboard to close that form down. And that looks really nice. I think that's going to make a nice sign. Now, just to illustrate how easy it is to create a V-carvable sign from what we have right here, we're quickly going to jump over to our Toolpaths tab. Look at our material setup, which is what we always should do every time we go into cutting a new job. And this again is the setup of the material on our machine. So we're going to make sure that our software understands what's going to be happening over there. So we have our thickness set to 0.75 an inch. Our datum is going to be set to the bottom left-hand corner. We're zeroing off our material surface. There isn't any 3D content, so that's fine. We can push that all the way to the top. And our rapid Z-gaps above our material and our home start position are safe and appropriate for our job. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now I'm going to choose the vectors I'd like to go ahead and V-carve, and that's all the ones in the center here, not the outside border. Let's open up our VCarve toolpath. Our start depth is going to be at 0. We're not going to have any sort of flat depth at all. We're going to allow the V-bit to cut as deep as it can. We may as well go ahead and use this 60-degree V-bit. We're not going to use any clearance tools, so all this is grayed out. We're not going to worry about any of this at the bottom here. We're just going to go ahead and rename this VCarve, and we'll calculate that. Have a quick preview of the 3D toolpaths that we have here. And yeah, that's going to look really sharp in the end. Let's close this down. Let's quickly go ahead and select this outside vector here. We're going to create a profile toolpath so we can cut this out. So our start depth is going to be at 0. If we forget our material thickness, we can just put Z in here and press equals on our keyboard, and that'll bring that right up for us. We're going to use a standard old 1/4 inch end mill for this particular operation. We're going to cut outside of our vector line. We're not going to worry about ramp or plunge moves. We're not going to use any tabs at all because we just want to take a look and see how this is all going to cut. We'll look at that in a bit later. And we're just going to go ahead and rename this Cutout. And then we can calculate that. Preview our visible toolpaths. And right in our 3D view, we can go ahead and double click on any of this waste material. So we'll get a good idea of what our end sign is going to look like. And that looks really nice. So you can see how quick and easy it was to take in a set of prepared vectors, create a quick VCarving toolpath, add in a profile toolpath, and then preview the output that you should expect to see on your machine. Now let's go ahead and explore the idea of maybe taking this and doing a few little edits so that it's attractive to a larger audience. Let's close this down, look back down on top of our material. Let's go over to our 2D view, and also we'll flip back over to our design tab. Press F on our keyboard to focus right in on that sheet and unselect everything. So the first thing I want to think about is what text I could put on this sign that would make it a little bit more interesting for a larger audience. And I know in my circle of friends, everybody likes a nice backyard barbecue. So I think that if we replace the bull's head text with backyard barbecue, I think that would look quite nice, and maybe even add an arrow so they know what direction to go in when they're visiting. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to find a font that looks a lot like the bull's head font, because we're going to try and keep the B, because both phrases start with the same letter, so we may as well keep this B in place where it is. But we are going to need to match up the font with the B. So let's go to our draw text option, and we're going to type in backyard barbecue. And that looks pretty good. The font, Rockwell Condensed, seems to be a nice match for what we want, so that's great. And we're just going to click close. So now what I want to do is to get this text sized up to an appropriate size to replace this bull's head text. So the first thing, like I mentioned earlier, is that we don't need the B. So because this is still a text element, I can go back to my draw text tool and remove the B from that, and it will be updated in my 2D view appropriately. And now what I want to do is figure out what the length is I need for my text. So if I go ahead and choose the U and hold down my shift key and grab the D, and I look down on my bottom right hand corner, I can see the width of that is 6.6 of an inch. So then what I can go ahead and do is to select this text. Now I can go over underneath my transform object section of my design tab and choose to set the size of these objects. I'm going to set the width of this to be 6.6, but be sure that my XY is turned off, because I only want it to size it in one direction. And I can click apply. Close that down. And let's just go ahead and move that up out of the way for a second. Next thing we need to do is to think about the height of the text. Now, because our backyard barbecue text has a Q in it, we have this little squiggle that falls below the baseline. So that creates us a little bit of a unique challenge. We just can't go ahead and measure the height of one of these and then size these up appropriately. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag in two guidelines, and I'm going to snap one of those guidelines to the top of the U, and I'm going to snap one of those to the bottom of the U. And I'm going to stop right there until we make other changes to our logo, and then we can move this into place. So the next thing we need to just make note of is the distance between the U or the text and this border. So we're going to zoom in, and we're going to go over to our measurement tool underneath the edit object section of our design tab. We'll select that, and we'll click on this node and pull it straight up until it snaps to that vector border. And you'll see over on my left-hand side under the measurement tools dialog, the distance is 0.0666. So we're going to make that 0.067. We're just going to make a note of that because we're going to need that in a little bit. Okay, let's close that down. And we'll zoom out. Now let's go ahead and delete all of this text that we don't need and any other vectors that come along with it. Now we're going to need to cut this vector so that we can finish off this line up and down to make this more of a real rectangle. And that'll all make sense why we're doing it in a bit. So we'll select that. We're going to go into node mode. We'll zoom in on this bottom node here. We'll right click on that and we'll go down to cut. Then we'll go ahead and just scroll up to our other ones up. And you'll see there happens to be two really close together. So we're going to zoom in nice and tight and we'll right click and we're going to go ahead and cut that one. And then we'll zoom back out again. And you'll see that now we have gone ahead and separated this part of that vector with this other part. So let's go over to our selection mode. We'll select this bit of the vector and we'll delete that out of there. We'll reselect this. Now we need to close this off. So we'll right click on that and we'll go down to join or close. We'll choose with a line and there we have it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to grab our text and we're going to move it into place where we think it needs to go. So it's going to go somewhere around there. We'll zoom in and we'll just kind of make sure that that snaps to that guideline as it should. That looks pretty good. And we're just going to nudge it over a little bit, maybe to there. Zoom back out again. Now, if you remember correctly, we've got these guidelines set in place. So that was the height of our text. And we'll see now we don't need to worry so much about the Q because what we're going to do is just going to grab this top control handle and we're just going to drag that down until the R fits inside of that. There we go. So now that's all good, but that little squiggle is causing us a little bit more of a problem because it's running into this bottom graphic here that we don't want. So we're just going to go ahead and delete out these guidelines, and to do that we can just drag them back up to the ruler again. So we don't need those anymore. Select the text, and we're just going to use our cursor keys and nudge it up just a little bit, probably around there somewhere would be great. Now, remember we had taken that measurement about that border a little bit earlier, so we're going to use that now. We're going to go ahead and offset that text outwards 0.067 of an inch. We're going to create sharp corners, and we're going to make sure that we select that new one. We'll offset that outwards, then we'll close that down. Now, the next thing we're going to want to do is to remove any of these little sections that we don't really need. So we're just going to go ahead and just select those and delete those out of there, because they're not important. And the chances are pretty good they're so small they'll end up breaking off anyway, so we're not going to worry about those. One of the last things we need to do before we move into our creating our toolpaths is we're going to need to weld this outline with this outline. In order to use the weld tool, you have to have two closed vectors. That's why we closed that vector that was around the B. So to do that, we just need to hold down our shift key and select both of those, and we can go ahead and weld those together. Then we can off click that. That looks pretty nice. The last thing I want to do is add a little bit of an arrow down here so that we can point in the direction of our backyard barbecue. Okay, to draw in our arrow, we're going to go over to our Create Vector section of our Design tab again, and down to the Draw a Polyline. So we'll select that, and right in our 2D view, we're just going to go ahead and drop in some lines. We're going to start here, and we're going to go up a distance, over this way a little bit, back this way, out here. That looks okay. Then we'll just press escape on our keyboard. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go over to our mirror tool underneath our transformed object section of our design tab. And we're just going to go ahead and flip that horizontally. Make sure we don't have Flip About Job Center turned on. We do want to create a mirrored copy. So we're just going ahead and flip that. Close that down. And then we can just go ahead and drag it down so the two tips of the arrow kind of match up perfectly. Hold down our shift key and grab both of those. We'll right click and we're going to say join. We're going to move our endpoints. Right click again. We're going to go join and we'll move our endpoints again. That way it's now a closed vector. And just to make it look a little more fancy, we're just going to go and select that. Go into node mode. Shortcut key N on your keyboard. I'm going to select all of these nodes here. I'm just going to make it a little bit longer to fill in that space. And we'll right click on top of this line and we'll turn it to a Bezier. And we'll grab those two control handles and move it down twice. I'm going to go ahead and do the same over here. We'll turn that into a Bezier. We'll grab those two control points and we'll just move up twice. Press escape on our keyboard. And that looks perfect. Now we can go ahead and start to develop some tooling. To do that, we're just going to jump over to our Toolpaths tab. Now we have these two toolpaths we've already created from before, so we're just going to reuse those ones again. We'll double click on our VCarve toolpath. Okay, we're just going to make sure that we unselect everything and then reselect those vectors that we want to use to do our new VCarving with. Okay, and we're just going to go ahead and calculate that with the settings that we already have. Then we can preview our visible toolpath. And as always, because this might be a production piece, if we see any issues right now, then we're going to want to change these now before we go ahead and save these off and run them on our machine. But overall, that looks really nice. Now, another thing that I want to do with this is to send this off to a customer for approval and even possibly use an image from this 3D preview in my marketing material. And the finished part that I hope to produce is going to have these recesses painted a color. So what we're going to do is with this toolpath selected, we can go up to our toolpath color and we can give it a color of our choice. And in my case, I'm going to give it white. I'm not sure that's the color I'm going to use, but at least that gives people an idea of where I plan on painting this. And that looks good, I think, in the end. The next thing we're going to do is go ahead and recalculate our cutout toolpath. Just double click on that. And we're going to leave off the tabs right now, but when we get around to actually creating the tooling we're going to save off, we need to make sure that we add those in. So let's just go ahead, again, using the same settings we had before. Let's recalculate that, and let's preview our visible toolpaths. Go ahead and delete our waste material. And then we can go ahead and position that where we'd like it to be. And then we can save a preview image off onto our hard drive or onto a USB key that we could use again to send off to our clients. We just need to give it a name, so we're going to call this okay. And I've chosen JPEG as my file type, and I can just go ahead and choose save. And if we click save preview image again, you'll see that on my USB key I have a bitmap saved off of this. So I could send this to a customer, or again, use it in my marketing material if I'd like to. So now what we want to do is to close this down, and we need to recreate this cutout toolpath. So let's reset our preview. Close this down. Let's go back into our cutout toolpath, and we want to add in some tabs. So in this case, a length of 1/4 inch is going to be fine. A thickness of 0.1 of an inch is going to be fine, and we can edit our tabs. Now we can go ahead and tell the software how many tabs we'd like to put in there. We're going to put in 4, and it'll automatically place those tabs where it thinks they should be, and they look great. They're on nice flat areas, easy to remove, and I can sand down those spots if I need to. That's great. So let's close this down. Let's recalculate that toolpath. Let's go ahead and preview all of our toolpaths again. So there's the VCarving, and there we have the profile cut, and you'll see that we have tabs in place. Now I'm not too worried that I don't see in the 3D view any material here holding this part in place. I know that my material is actually wider or taller than what it is here, so that's okay. I'll have lots of material on both sides of this and on the ends to hold it in place, so I'm not worried about that at all. And when I set my XY datum, it'll actually be slightly inside of my material, so I'll have that support that I need. And that looks great. So let's go ahead now and close that down and save off our toolpaths. Now we're going to make sure that we save off all of our visible toolpaths. So we're going to turn all of our toolpaths on. We have our proper machine set up. This is going to be the Ooznest Worker B Z1 Plus, and we're going to use this post processor. So we can go ahead and save off our toolpaths. And we're just going to call this BBQ sign, and we'll save that. And if we go back and look and see what we have saved off, you'll see that we have 2 toolpaths saved off. One, which is our VCarve tool, and the other, which is our cutout pass, which we use the 1/4 inch end mill for. Cancel. And with that, I think we have pretty much everything that we need.
So I've gone ahead now and saved off my toolpaths onto my USB drive. So now I can just bring them over to my laptop that's hooked up to the Ooze Nest CNC. Now in the past, we've also used a cloud service called Dropbox to get our files from our design PC to our controller PC. That might be an option that you might want to look at when you're trying to get your files moved around. Now it's really important that you know the controller software for your CNC machine. And in this case, Ooze Nest has a great set of online files and online documentation that you can go ahead and learn how to use your software. So let's go ahead and get that over to our controller PC and get things started. So as you can see, I've chosen a hold down method for my material that's safe and appropriate for this job. The hold downs that I have here are actually a free project you can download from your V&Co account, and you can cut them yourself if you'd like to once you get done all of these getting started videos. This way I'm going to be using, or in this particular situation, I'll be using these right angles here to ensure that I can swap out this piece of material really quickly and put a new one in its place. And it's always going to be indexed from this corner, which is great. And these cam locks make it really easy just to pop it out and pop it back in again. So now I've got that all safe and secure. It's not going to go anywhere. I'm going to go ahead and set my XY datum off the corner of my material. I'm going to end up going ahead and zeroing my tool off the surface of my material, just like I set up in my software, and then we can go ahead and get this cutting. Okay, so the VCarving toolpath is just finished up. It looks really great. I've gone ahead and vacuumed it all off, and I'm pretty happy with the results. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap out the V-bit for the end mill that we're going to use for our profile cut. I'm going to be referencing the same X and Y datum as before. So once I swap in my tools, all I'm going to need to do is just go ahead and zero that off the material surface using my touch plate, and then I can run that profile toolpath. I'm really happy with that. It turned out really good. There's about 1,000 different ways you could finish this if you're a proper sign maker. I just gave it a quick clear coat and it still looks really nice. I'd hang it up just like it is. Now in this video, if you remember, what we did is we covered bringing in an external file, taking a look at how easy it was to VCarve that file, making a few edits, and then outputting some toolpaths. That was pretty easy to do. Now in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to build on that VCarve toolpath. We're going to look at some more of those options to show you other ways you can use that in your projects. See you then.